everyone, my name is Jolene Farmer and I'm one of the school psychologists here in Anne Arundel County. I've worked at the elementary and secondary levels throughout my 17 years as a school psychologist. Supporting LGBTQ kids is near and dear to my heart because this is my community. I'm married to a beautiful woman who is also an educator and we have 3 kids. I know that if you are here to listen to this presentation, this is also an important issue to you. Please know that there is no judgment for where you are in your journey. You are working to support and care for your child, and that is a beautiful place to be. This is an overview, but we will cover what may be a lot of vocabulary. You don't need to be an expert in all the lingo, and you don't need to memorize anything. The most important takeaway from today is that acceptance and love are the important ingredients that your child needs to grow and thrive. Our most important goal today is to understand what your support can mean for LGBTQ kids. I want you to know that it can quite literally save their life. I also want you to know how being a member of the LGBTQ community can impact children and teens. And lastly, I want to offer resources for you as you continue on your journey as an ally. So let's start at the beginning with LGBTQ and talk for a minute about what that means. Sometimes you'll hear the word queer thrown around, and I want you to think of that word as an umbrella term. People under that umbrella, whether they be gay, bisexual, transgender, lesbian, etc., may identify as queer. It's not specific to just one sexuality or one gender. We'll go on to talk a little bit more about what the various letters stand for, but I just wanted to share that as an overview of how people use some of the terminology. We're going to cover some of the vocabulary that may come up later in the presentation so that you have context and so that things can have more meaning. Please don't feel overwhelmed or that you need to memorize all of the information in these terms. There are links at the bottom of the presentation so that you can always go back to learn more or refresh your memory. All right, let's start with sexual orientation. This refers who you are attracted to and who you want to have relationships with. Some people may identify as straight, bisexual, gay, lesbian, asexual, queer, and many more. Gender identity is how an individual identifies in terms of their gender. Gender identity may include male, female, androgynous, transgender, or a combination of these identities. Gender expression are all the ways, including hairstyle, clothing, behavior, and even jewelry, that a person may choose to communicate their gender to themselves and to the world. Questioning. This is just a process where a person begins to understand and explore what their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression might be. All people in the LGBTQ community go through this process at some point in establishing their identity. Coming out. This is the ongoing process that an LGBTQ person goes through to recognize their own identity and to be open about this with others. What does the plus in LGBTQ stand for? This refers to all of the gender identities and sexual orientations that are not specifically covered by the other 5 initials. The community and associated vocabulary is ever growing and evolving. Pronouns. Pronouns are used in place of a proper noun, like someone's name. We use pronouns most often when referring to someone without their name. So instead of saying Jolene went to Disney, we would say she went to Disney. In English, our most commonly used pronouns, he, she, specifically refer to a person's gender. For queer, gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, and transgender people, these pronouns may not fit. They can create discomfort and cause stress and anxiety. Misgendering refers to when someone misuses a pronoun or name, especially for a transgender person that does not match with their true gender identity. And lastly, heteronormativity is the assumption that everyone is straight. I want to take a minute and talk specifically about transgender youth. Hearing that biological sex and gender are not the same thing might be different than what you've learned in the past. Research tells us that gender is not inherently connected to one's physical anatomy. Transgender people feel that their biological sex that was assigned to them at birth doesn't match their true gender identity. We talked about gender being more of a social construct rather than something being inherently related to biological sex, but I want to share a few other transgender terms that might be helpful to know. Gender variant or gender nonconforming simply refers to when people who don't conform to our traditional gender expectations, and this can be about their physical experience or their likes or dislikes or the behaviors that they engage in. And this especially becomes apparent when there's a mismatch between the presentation of someone's gender and norms and behaviors that might not typically be associated with that. Transitioning is the process through which a transgender person strives to have their physical presentation align with their own perception of their gender identity. And you may hear people referring to males transitioning to being females or females transitioning to males. All right, we're moving back out to the bigger LGBTQ community and talking about some facts versus myths. Let's start with the idea that people choose to be gay, bisexual, transgender, what have you. This is a myth. People do not choose their sexual orientation or their gender identity. According to research, sexual orientation and gender identity emerge really early in life, and they don't relate to things such as how you were brought up, or whether you had a parent who was gay, or an uncle, or whether you saw gay images in the media. Sexual orientation and gender are not self-selected. They're not lifestyle choices. Another myth that persisted for a long time in the past, and unfortunately may still exist in some places today, is that being transgender, gay, lesbian, and so forth is a dysfunction and that it needs to be fixed or cured. In 2009, the American Psychological Association adopted a resolution stating that mental health professionals should not tell clients that they can change their sexual orientation through therapy or other treatments. Being LGBTQ is a beautiful thing. It is not a mental illness or a health condition. It does not need to be changed or fixed in any way. In fact, trying to do so can cause serious mental health damage to kids and adults. I think this next fact versus myth is particularly important for us as parents. The idea that gay, bisexual, transgender, lesbian, queer people who keep their sexual orientation or their gender identity to themselves will just have an easier time. They'll just fit into society better. That is emphatically untrue. People in our community who accept and affirm their identity are so much healthier, so much happier, so much more successful. And that continual attempt to fit in and hide a part of who you fundamentally are is incredibly damaging. All right, let's think about the coming out process. I think that the most helpful thing I can say about this is that it's not a one-time experience. Let's talk for a minute about why that coming out experience is so important. Coming out gives people a sense of belonging, of connectedness, of meaning. It allows them to feel safe and accepted. It enhances their overall well-being. And people describe it as a lifting of a weight from their heart and from their shoulders that they were carrying around, and it just felt so heavy. And in the coming out process, people typically have a range of reactions that can go from extremely negative to neutral to very positive. And the reaction that people get as a part of their coming out process, especially adolescents, is so incredibly important. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the role that you can play in this process. I want to think about some risk factors that as a parent are difficult to hear, but so critical for us to think about in terms of how we support our children. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. Let me say that again, ages 10 to 24. So we really need to think about how we are supporting our kids, really from upper elementary through middle, high school, and beyond. LGBTQ youth are 5 times as likely as their heterosexual peers to have attempted suicide. And LGBTQ youth can experience homelessness at a much higher degree than their heterosexual peers. When they're in environments, whether it's a school setting or a home, that are not supportive and are rejecting, they may leave those environments, and that can lead to homelessness, which comes with so many additional risk factors related to their safety, to substance abuse, and so forth. We just talked about how suicide is a risk factor in general for young people, and we talked about the difference between heterosexual peers and members of the LGBTQ youth community and how that risk factor increases. Now I want to share the statistic that youth who come from a highly rejecting family are 8.4 times as likely to have attempted suicide as their LGBTQ peers who reported low to no levels of family rejection. And here is where you as an adult, whether it's as an educator or a parent or a community member, have so much power to be that safe, affirming, accepting person to minimize this risk. When kids come out and they have a negative experience, that deep fear of rejection is proven true. It increases their anxiety, their stress, their depression. potential use of substances, homelessness, as we talked about, and ultimately that risk of suicide increases. And that is why that coming out process and having a positive experience is so critical for LGBTQ youth. I want to speak for a minute on the experience that LGBTQ youth are having in Maryland and what they report as happening on an everyday basis in the school setting. 93% of these kiddos heard the word gay used in a derogatory way on a regular basis. 14% of LGBTQ students regularly heard school staff make homophobic remarks. On average, 23% of LGBTQ students have been physically harassed based on their sexual orientation, their gender expression, or their gender identity. Lastly, 10% of LGBTQ students have been physically assaulted based on their sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity. This is not okay. This is the experience that kids are having when they come to a place that should be a safe place. And that is why it is so important for parents, educators, community members, coaches, pastors, everyone to understand the need to affirm, accept, and protect these kids. All right, we're coming to the part of the presentation that is my favorite part, because this is what you can do to make a difference. So prior to when kids come out, what can you do to show them that you are a supportive person? None of us know how our child is going to identify in terms of their gender identity or their sexual orientation. So we can all show support for the LGBTQ community in general, so kids know where you stand. This means using inclusive language, trying to use the correct pronouns for people and using the correct terminology, not using negative slang terminology that is derogatory. Also, let's be careful about asking about our kids' interests. So for example, if someone has a 7th grade boy, they might make a joke about, hey, do you have any girlfriends at school? But maybe we can flip the script, and instead of assuming that a heterosexual relationship is the default, we can just say, hey, are you interested in anybody at school, right? When we do this, this opens the door and let kids know that we don't have that one expectation and that whatever they choose to share with us is okay. Also, just be clear with kids that you love and support them unconditionally, regardless of who they choose to love or how they choose to show themselves to the world. Okay, let's talk about creating a safe space for kids and teens after they've come out. You've already set the stage and shown that you're a person who in general supports the LGBTQ community. You can listen, and then listen some more. Be clear and consistent in your support and your love that you have for them, and share your appreciation for their courage. I can tell you that those words, I'm gay, I think I like girls, I might be bisexual, I'm not sure I really feel like a boy, whatever those words are that a child shares with an adult are some of the hardest things to say as a human being. And after someone gives you that gift of trust and shares those things, please, please, please thank them for their courage and for their trust. Also, please let children and adolescents know that you will maintain their privacy. It is such a fear that people have of being outed to others when they're not ready. So please let them know that they're in control of this information and that they can choose who they want to tell when. It's really important that we want to get our kids and teens connected to supportive communities. And in the school setting, almost all of the middle schools and high schools have what they generally refer to as a GSA. That's a Gay Straight Alliance. It's a club that meets at school and they work to support the LGBTQ community in general. And there are kids in the club who are straight, but who might just have a passion for supporting this community, or maybe they have a gay parent or a gay friend. And then there's kids in the community that are questioning, and then there's kids in the community that are coming out and already have come out. It's a whole group of people that care about LGBTQ people, and being immersed in that type of culture can be so affirming and supportive. So please encourage your kids to join these communities, reach out to your school and ask, what supports are available for my child? Online communities can be great, but please proceed with caution. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they all have a ton of LGBTQ adolescent content, support groups, etc. However, I would really encourage you to explore these with your child and think about which groups are healthy, which groups are sharing accurate information, and which groups can really give them that positive sense of community. Now, the next one is so important. Please respond to biased language that others may use. If you were at a family get-together and someone uses a derogatory word to refer to gay people, don't just let that pass without saying anything, because I can promise you your child or your student has heard that, and it hurts. Be direct and clear that that language is not acceptable. And lastly, let adolescents and kids know that you are learning and working hard to support them. You want to hear what you can do to be helpful. I sometimes feel so confused, even in my own community, because there's so much that I'm still learning that I may not know. I identify as a cisgender woman, meaning my sex as female is consistent with how I was born and what was assigned to me at birth. So I have a lot to learn when I'm working with transgender youth. So I let them know, hey, I'm here to learn and I want to listen and I want to be helpful. Let me know what I can do. And I think if we give kids that opportunity to share, they will guide us in how to help them. We talked about speaking up when biased language is used, but when someone uses accurate or positive language for LGBTQ people, thank them for speaking up. Let them know you noticed that and it is appreciated. That makes such a difference when people understand that their efforts to be accepting and inclusive and affirming matter and are noticed, and that really increases people's tendency to continue using that positive, accurate, helpful language. We've talked a lot about ways we can be helpful and supportive to our children and adolescents on this journey, but I want to share some specific do nots. When someone shares their story with you and they come out, it's not helpful to say things like, I knew it, because you're really kind of taking the story away from them and making it your own. You don't want to say, are you sure? You're so young. Please know how much they've thought about this before they've shared it with you. Saying things like, are you sure? Just really invalidates their experience and the courage it took for them to share that with you. We don't want to say things like, you're just confused. It's a phase. It will pass. Sometimes members of the community are questioning and they're not sure where they fit or if they are a member of the community. But I can assure you there is no danger to affirming that you accept them, regardless of how they ultimately decide to identify, versus not accepting them and rejecting them comes with so many of those risk factors we talked about. We don't want to say things like, well, you just haven't found the right guy or girl yet. We don't want to say, don't tell anyone else, or don't tell grandma, or don't tell your teacher. We don't want to encourage shame. And then we don't want to say that, you know what, I don't think you can be gay. I know you dated Robin. That doesn't make sense. Sometimes on our journey, we're figuring things out as we go, or we're conforming to expectations that other people have of us. And so please don't invalidate what someone has shared based on their prior history. We want to be really careful not to share someone's sexual identity or identity to others without their explicit permission. It is generally better for them to be the one to share that information. We don't want to out someone without their permission. It's such a violation of their privacy and their sense of ownership over their story. Also, people are ready to come out to different people at different times. A child may feel very comfortable coming out to their family, but not ready to come out at school or to their sports team, and we want to respect their readiness to share that information. Let's talk for a minute about pronouns. It can be really difficult to change pronouns, especially when we're talking about our own children, and it's okay to acknowledge that difficulty. Finding people to support you in the journey, if that's something that your child or your student is experiencing, is really important. However, do not put that burden on the child or the student. They're already managing enough. Using someone's preferred pronouns shows that you care and you respect them. If you make a mistake, just acknowledge it, commit to doing better, and move on. Don't spend so much time apologizing, because that puts the burden on the adolescent to have to tell you that it's okay, right? Just say, oh, I'm so sorry, I misgendered you, I'm going to do better, and move on. We talked a lot about what you as a family or an educator can do to support LGBTQ youth, but let's talk for a minute about what AACPS is doing to support our students. First, please reach out to your child's school to see what they have in place to support LGBTQ youth. You can ask for your school's social worker, school counselor, or school psychologist. All of these mental health clinicians are trained to support LGBTQ youth and can talk to you specifically about what is in place at the school. We talked about the GSAs in middle and high school. We also have a countywide GSA that is available to all secondary students, and they meet virtually or in person on a quarterly basis. AACPS has passed 2 important regulations in 2021. The links are at the end of the presentation, and we'll do an overview of the protections these regulations give to your LGBTQ students. These policies are designed to create a safe, welcoming, and affirming environment. To create this environment, the policy specifically prohibits discrimination and harassment based on sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. It also prohibits retaliation for any such reports of discrimination. The policies specify that students have the right to be addressed by preferred names and pronouns. The privacy for medical information relates to situations where a child has officially changed their name, gender, and so forth, and the prior information about name, gender, etc. remains private so that the student is recognized by the current identified information. The policies encourage the creation of supportive organizations such as GSAs. Lastly, the policy affirms the right of students to use facilities such as bathrooms and locker rooms that correspond with their gender identity. There are so many wonderful resources for LGBTQ youth and their families. I just want to highlight a few of the resources that I frequently recommend. The Trevor Project is a 24/7 crisis hotline, and they offer support for LGBTQ people via chat, text, or phone. Their mission is to prevent suicide for LGBTQ+ people. I found that adolescents tend to prefer text or chat. It's a great resource because there is a trained counselor on the end of that communication to respond. PFLAG is a great organization because it's designed for families to understand and support their LGBTQ friends and families. This is a great place to begin learning about how to support someone in the LGBTQ community. GLISTEN is an organization really formed for teachers and educators. They focus on ensuring that LGBTQ youth can learn and grow and to minimize bullying and harassment. It's a great site for anyone really if you're looking for information and resources. Learning for Justice, which was formerly known as Teaching Tolerance, is really an organization focused on the intersection of LGBTQ and racial justice, and they have a wealth of really great resources on their site as well. And lastly, the Human Rights Campaign advocates and supports LGBTQ people in the United States and around the world. All of the organizations that we just talked about have a social media presence on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I've also linked to a few additional resources here. The Annapolis Pride chapter does a wonderful job of supporting LGBTQ youth and adults. They have a parade every year that is an exceptionally affirming, positive experience, especially for people that are new to the community. So I would really encourage you to check them out. And I want to thank you for the time you took today to learn about supporting LGBTQ youth. Your journey in learning more to accept your child or your student or your neighbor can quite literally save their life, and I promise it will make a difference to them. I am so grateful for your interest in this, and I hope that you will continue to learn and be a support for our community. Thank you.